I was so shocked when my family told me not to come to my own sister's wedding, but I showed up anyway, arm in arm with the groom's brother, just to watch their perfect smiles crumble. I still remember the moment I found out about my sister Emily's wedding, not from her, not from my parents, but from a distant cousin's Instagram story that appeared on my feed late one evening. There she was, glowing in a white lace dress, holding a bouquet of soft pink roses, standing beside her fiancé in front of a shimmering backdrop of fairy lights and flowers. The caption read, "Can't wait for the big day next week. Emily and James forever." My stomach dropped. I blinked, scrolled again, hoping I had read it wrong. But there it was, my entire family liking and commenting, hearts and congratulations scattered below, everyone except me. No text, no call, no invitation. My name was nowhere to be found. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen. The glow of my phone, the only light in my apartment, my chest tightening with disbelief. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was the silence. The deliberate exclusion. The way they didn't even think I'd find out. It wasn't the first time I'd been pushed to the side. In my family, I had always been the odd one out, the artist in a family of accountants and lawyers, the dreamer who didn't fit their definition of success. My parents believed in achievements that could be framed and hung on the wall, in titles that came with respect and stability. I believed in color, in expression, in the beauty of imperfection. When I decided to study art instead of joining my father's real estate business, it was as if I had declared war on everything they stood for. My father had looked at me with quiet disappointment and said, "You'll grow out of this phase." But I never did. Instead, I moved out, rented a tiny apartment downtown, and spent my days painting murals on cafe walls and teaching art classes to children who reminded me of my younger self. Curious, hopeful, alive. The more I built my own world, the less I fit into theirs. I'd come home for the holidays, sit quietly at dinner while my relatives asked about promotions, salaries, and new cars. When they turned to me, I'd smile and say, "I finished a mural project for the children's hospital," and they'd nod politely, then change the subject. I learned to expect nothing. But still, Emily's wedding? My own sister's wedding? That was a new kind of wound. I called my mother that night. My hands trembled slightly as I held the phone. When she answered, her tone was cheerful, oblivious. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" I didn't even try to hide the tremor in my voice. "I just saw Emily's wedding post. Why didn't anyone tell me?" There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause that told me everything before she even spoke. "Oh, darling," she finally said, her voice lowering. "It's just, Emily wanted a small ceremony. You know how things have been between you two. We didn't want any tension. It's supposed to be a happy day." My throat tightened. Tension? Mom? I haven't even spoken to Emily in months. What tension? "She feels like you judge her choices," my mother replied gently. "She just wants everything to go smoothly. Maybe it's best if you don't come." Those words, "best if you don't come," cut deeper than I could ever admit. I wanted to scream, to tell her that all I ever did was love them despite the way they treated me, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. I hung up before the tears spilled over, then sat in silence, staring at the blank canvas propped against my wall. I'd always used art to process pain, but that night I couldn't pick up a brush. It felt pointless. I wasn't angry at just Emily. I was angry at myself for still caring. The following days dragged on like slow, heavy rain. I went to work, smiled at my students, painted fake smiles on the walls, and came home to emptiness. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the wedding, my sister walking down the aisle, my parents wiping tears of joy, the laughter, the music, the photos that would be shared online. And I wouldn't be there, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't wanted. Then, one evening, as I was cleaning my brushes after class, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hey, it's Ethan," a deep, familiar voice said. My heart skipped. Ethan, James's older brother. I had met him years ago at a family barbecue when Emily and James had first started dating. Back then, he'd been the kind of man everyone liked. Charming, a little mischievous, always with a half smile that made you wonder what he was thinking. We'd talked for hours that day about art, music, and how he hated pretentious social gatherings as much as I did. He was one of the few people who made me feel like I wasn't the problem. "I heard you weren't invited," he said, his tone casual but with an edge of indignation. "That's ridiculous." I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, well, I guess they didn't want any drama." There was a pause, and then his voice softened. "You know what's funny? They forgot I have a +1. Want a ride to the wedding anyway?" For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Was he serious? My first instinct was to say no. It felt reckless, too bold, too risky. But then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the realization that I was tired of letting them erase me. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked. He chuckled. "Probably not, but it sounds like a fun one." I felt a smile tug at my lips for the first time in days. "All right," I said. "Let's do it." That night, I lay awake thinking about what I had just agreed to. Part of me felt guilty, but another part, the one that had been stepped on, ignored, silenced, felt powerful. For once, I wasn't going to hide in the shadows. If they didn't want me there, I'd show them that I didn't need their permission. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur of mixed emotions. I oscillated between nerves and defiance. I went shopping for a dress, not just any dress, but something that would make me feel confident. I found it in a small boutique downtown. Deep emerald green satin, simple but striking, the kind of dress that made you walk taller. I looked at myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. She wasn't the timid sister who used to apologize for existing. She was someone who had finally realized her worth. When the morning of the wedding arrived, sunlight streamed through my curtains, soft and golden. I brewed coffee, my hands shaking slightly as I checked the time. "Alan, my heart was racing." Ethan texted, "Outside." I took one last look at myself, hair curled, dress smooth, makeup subtle but sharp, and stepped outside. Ethan leaned against his car, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his tie undone just enough to make it look effortless. When he saw me, his eyes widened slightly, then he smiled. "You look incredible," he said. "So do you," I replied, sliding into the passenger seat. The drive to the countryside venue was quiet at first, the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of the road filling the space between us. Then Ethan turned to me and said, "You know, they're going to lose their minds when they see you." "Good," I said, staring out the window. "Maybe it's time they remembered I exist." He laughed. "That's the spirit." As we neared the venue, the sky opened wide above us, blue and endless, the fields shimmering under the sun. The closer we got, the more my nerves twisted into something electric. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a reckoning. When the white stone building finally came into view, I took a deep breath. "You ready?" Ethan asked, glancing at me. "More than ever," I said. And as he parked the car, a calm determination settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to be the quiet one in the corner, the afterthought, the invisible sister. I was going to walk into that wedding, not as someone begging for acceptance, but as someone who no longer needed it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the sweetest kind of revenge. The moment we pulled up to the wedding venue, I felt my pulse in my throat. The countryside estate stood tall and glimmering under the golden sun, wrapped in ribbons, floral arches, and wealth. It was the kind of place that screamed perfection, just like my family loved to project. I took a deep breath as Ethan turned off the ignition. For a second, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. The emerald dress hugging me in all the right places, my hair cascading down in soft waves, the faintest hint of defiance in my eyes. This was it. The moment they never expected to happen. The moment I would walk into a celebration I was told not to attend, and own it. Ethan stepped out first, his presence commanding without trying. He moved with an ease I envied, confidence radiating from him like warmth. When he opened the car door for me, I felt dozens of eyes already turning our way. My heels touched the gravel driveway, and for a heartbeat I thought about turning back. But then I caught sight of my mother near the entrance, dressed in a pale gold gown, clutching her designer clutch, laughing beside my aunt. When her eyes landed on me, her laughter died mid-sentence. Her lips parted in disbelief. My father, who stood beside her, froze completely. It was the silence that followed that gave me power. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "You sure you want to do this?" I lifted my chin slightly, my heartbeat steadying. "Absolutely," he smiled. "Then let's give them something to talk about." He offered me his arm, and I took it, letting him lead me up the marble steps like it was the most natural thing in the world. I could feel the heat of the stairs, the murmurs swirling behind us like smoke. My mother blinked rapidly, as if hoping I was some illusion. My father's jaw tensed so hard that the muscle ticked near his temple. "Amelia," my mother finally said, voice tight and brittle. "You came." I smiled, polite but unwavering. "Of course. I wouldn't miss my sister's wedding." Before she could answer, Ethan chimed in smoothly. "She's with me." The subtle emphasis in his tone made something flicker across my father's face. Confusion, maybe even a touch of discomfort. Ethan had always been respected, even admired. His presence beside me gave me credibility, and I knew it. The inside of the venue was a cathedral of luxury, gold drapes, white roses, and crystal chandeliers. Everything was immaculate, curated to reflect Emily's perfect image. My heart twisted as I looked around. I could picture her approving every detail, while I hadn't even been considered for an invitation. I should have felt small, but I didn't. I felt alive, sharper than ever. Guests began to whisper. "She wasn't invited. Isn't that the sister they don't talk to? Wait, is she with the groom's brother?" Ethan chuckled under his breath. "You'd think they were watching a scandalous TV show." "They kind of are," I murmured back, smirking. We took our seats on the groom's side. From across the room, Emily finally noticed me. Her face, flawless under layers of makeup, went pale. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and in that silence between us was a lifetime of resentment. I could see the flicker of disbelief, then irritation, and finally the forced smile she pasted on her face when she realized the photographer was nearby. The ceremony began. Emily walked down the aisle on our father's arm, glowing under the soft light. I couldn't deny it, she looked beautiful, and for a second I almost softened. She was my sister, after all. But when she passed me and deliberately avoided eye contact, the moment shattered. The pain returned, sharp and cold. Ethan leaned close to whisper, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, even though I wasn't. The vows were poetic, the kiss perfect. Everyone clapped and cheered, the orchestra playing a tender tune as the couple turned to face the crowd. Emily's eyes swept past me again, and this time I caught the faintest twitch at the corner of her lips, something between irritation and challenge. I smiled sweetly in return, slow and deliberate. When the ceremony ended and the reception began, the hall transformed into a whirlwind of chatter, champagne, and music. Ethan stayed close, effortlessly charming the guests. He was the kind of man who could make anyone feel seen, and I couldn't help but notice how easily he deflected the tension surrounding us. I appreciated it more than I could say. At one point, he leaned in. "You know, your sister looks like she's trying very hard not to look at us." "She always did hate when the spotlight shifted," I replied dryly. We found our table, tucked neatly in the corner, clearly the last-minute addition, given my unplanned appearance. I didn't mind. From here I could observe everything. I saw Emily laughing too loudly, trying too hard. My parents pretended everything was fine. My aunt was whispering to her friend while sneaking glances in my direction. I sipped my champagne slowly, savoring every drop of their discomfort. Then, as if to test me, Emily approached our table during the dinner hour. Her smile was radiant for the crowd, but when she leaned closer to me, her voice dropped to a hiss. "What are you doing here, Amelia?" I looked up at her calmly. Attending your wedding? Congratulations, by the way. She narrowed her eyes. You weren't invited for a reason. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. Actually, she was invited as my guest. Emily's eyes darted to him, her expression faltering for a split second before she recovered. Of course, she said smoothly, loud enough for others to hear. We're so happy you could make it. Then she turned back to me, whispering, Don't cause a scene. I smiled. Don't worry. I wouldn't dream of it. After she walked away, Ethan chuckled softly. She's not used to losing control, is she? Not at all, I replied. And she hates when I don't play along. As the night went on, the music swelled, and laughter echoed across the room. Ethan stood and offered me his hand. Dance with me? For a moment I hesitated, part of me still that quiet girl who preferred to stay unnoticed. But then I remembered how it felt to be erased, to be told I didn't belong. I placed my hand in his. Yes? He led me to the center of the dance floor, his hand firm on my back. The orchestra shifted to a slow, romantic tune, and suddenly, all the whispers faded into background noise. It was just us. Ethan's steady gaze, the warmth of his hand, the way he guided me effortlessly through each step. I could feel eyes on us, but I didn't care. I met his gaze and smiled. The kind of smile that came from freedom, not defiance. You're incredible, you know that? He murmured. For showing up uninvited? I teased. For showing up for yourself, he said. That takes guts. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For so long I'd been starving for someone to see me, not the version my family disapproved of, but me as I was. I felt something loosen inside my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. When the song ended, people clapped politely. But I could tell that beneath the polite smiles were questions they wouldn't dare ask. Emily's gaze burned from across the room. I lifted my glass in a silent toast to her. Her jaw tightened, and she turned away. Later, when we stepped outside for some air, the cool night breeze brushed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of roses and candle wax. The courtyard was empty except for a few lanterns flickering along the path. Ethan lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it. He just held it between his fingers, thoughtful. Do you regret coming? He asked quietly. I looked up at the glowing windows where the music still drifted out softly. No, I said after a pause. For once, I don't regret standing up for myself. He smiled faintly. Good, because you didn't just show up. You stole the night. I laughed softly, shaking my head. That wasn't my intention. Maybe not, he said. But sometimes, the best revenge is just being unbothered. His words settled deep inside me. He was right. I hadn't come to humiliate anyone or seek vengeance. I'd come to reclaim a part of myself that my family had tried to bury. And as I looked back at the glowing ballroom, I realized something had changed. The power they once had over me was gone. Inside, they would probably gossip, speculate, and whisper. But it didn't matter anymore. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. When we finally walked back in, I noticed people staring again, but this time I met every gaze with quiet confidence. I wasn't the invisible sister anymore. I wasn't the embarrassment. I was a woman who refused to be erased, and they all knew it. Ethan leaned closer as we rejoined the crowd. You know, he said with a grin, they might remember this wedding for a lot of things, but mostly for you. I smiled, taking another sip of champagne. Then I guess I made it worth attending. And for the rest of the night, I did something my family never expected. I laughed, I danced, I lived. Because for once I didn't come to please anyone. I came to exist, and that in itself was victory. The music in the hall softened, replaced by the faint clinking of glasses and murmurs of guests taking their seats. The air was thick with the kind of elegance that came with money. Everything polished, perfect, orchestrated to impress. The scent of roses and champagne hung heavy. From the corner of the room, I could see Emily and her new husband seated at the center table, radiant under a spotlight, surrounded by the family that had once made me feel like a ghost in my own home. I sipped my drink, feeling the slow burn of defiance settle into something calmer. Poise. I had shown up, faced the stairs, and survived every whispered comment. But I wasn't done yet. When the host announced it was time for the wedding toasts, I felt the energy in the room shift. Emily's maid of honor stood first, her best friend Jessica. She was tall, elegant, her speech rehearsed to perfection, full of glowing words about Emily's grace and James's devotion. The crowd clapped politely. Then Emily's father-in-law spoke next, cracking jokes that made the audience laugh. I smiled faintly, pretending to listen. But all I could think about was how symbolic this was. Everyone having their say. Everyone except me, the person who wasn't even supposed to be here. I was prepared to sit quietly through the rest of the evening, satisfied with simply existing in their world again without shame. But then something unexpected happened. The microphone was passed around for anyone else who wanted to speak, and before I could look away, Ethan nudged me gently. "You should say something," he whispered. I blinked at him, startled. "What?" "No! I'm the last person they want to hear from." He smiled, his gaze steady. "That's exactly why you should speak." "I don't want to cause a scene," I muttered. "You won't," he said softly. "You'll just tell the truth." Before I could protest again, he stood and raised his hand, calling for the microphone. The host, looking mildly confused, passed it over. Ethan took it with an easy charm, addressing the crowd. "Before we wrap up, I think someone else deserves to say a few words," he said, turning toward me. "Someone who has something meaningful to share." And just like that, he placed the microphone in my trembling hand. The room went still. 100 eyes turned toward me. My heart pounded against my ribs, every instinct screaming at me to sit down. But when I glanced at Ethan, he nodded once, calm and reassuring. So I stood. The silence was deafening. I could almost hear the collective thought running through the crowd. What is she doing? I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the weight of the moment. My fingers tightened around the microphone. "I wasn't invited today," I began softly. My voice, though quiet, carried through the room like a thread of electricity. Heads turned. Conversations died instantly. "But I came anyway." A few gasps rippled through the audience. Emily's face froze, her smile faltering. My mother's hand shot to her chest in shock. My father looked down, jaw tight. I could feel every judgmental stare digging into my skin. But for once, I didn't flinch. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "I came because I realized something important. Sometimes family isn't about who invites you to the table. It's about who shows up when it matters." There was a long, charged pause, the kind of silence that felt sacred and uncomfortable at once. My throat tightened, but I kept going. Growing up, I thought love meant being accepted. That if I followed all the rules, worked hard enough, and became the person they wanted, then maybe I'd finally belong. But I was wrong. Love isn't approval. It's not about fitting into someone else's idea of worth. It's about seeing each other, even when we're different. I turned my gaze toward Emily. She was pale, blinking rapidly, her lips pressed together. "You and I may not understand each other," I said, my tone softer now. "But I'll always wish you happiness, truly, because that's what family should do. Wish each other well, even when they're not invited to the party." A hush fell so deep you could hear the clink of glass from the bar. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single clap started, hesitant at first, then joined by a few others. Ethan stood applauding with quiet pride. I handed back the microphone, my heart hammering, but inside a strange peace settled over me. I had spoken my truth, not in anger, but in grace. As I returned to my seat, Emily avoided my eyes, staring fixedly at the tablecloth. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, though whether from shame or emotion I couldn't tell. My father's posture had softened slightly, his expression unreadable. But I didn't need their reactions anymore. Their approval no longer defined me. Ethan leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. You were magnificent, he murmured. I smiled faintly, my pulse still racing. I don't know what came over me. Courage, he said simply. It looks good on you. The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur of polite conversation and stolen glances. Emily made her rounds, thanking guests, her laughter a little too forced. I stayed at my table talking with Ethan, savoring dessert and the sweet satisfaction of finally being seen. When the time came for the final dance, he pulled me onto the floor again. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, we moved slowly, the music wrapping around us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. The whispers had died down, replaced by something else. Respect, maybe even admiration. I could feel it in the way people looked at me differently now. Not as the forgotten sister, but as someone who dared to stand her ground with grace. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks erupted outside. The guests poured out onto the terrace, faces lit by bursts of color in the sky. I stood beside Ethan, watching the reflection of the flames in his eyes. They planned this for the newlyweds, I said quietly. He turned to me smiling. Funny, feels like they're for you. I laughed softly. Maybe they are. We stayed outside for a while, the night cool and full of possibility. For once, I didn't feel the ache of exclusion or the sting of rejection. I just felt free. When the crowd began to disperse, Emily approached me. Her dress shimmered under the light, but her eyes were tired. Can we talk? She asked hesitantly. Ethan gave me a reassuring squeeze on the arm and stepped aside, leaving us alone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled. You really blindsided me back there. I didn't mean to embarrass you, I said softly. I just needed to say what's been in my heart. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the ground. I know, and you were right. About a lot of things. Her voice trembled. I was cruel to you. We all were, I think. We just didn't know how to handle you being different. You scared us because you didn't follow the plan. But that was our problem, not yours. I didn't say anything for a while. I just let the words sink in, the apology I had never expected to hear. Then finally I smiled faintly. Thank you for saying that. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am, I nodded. I forgive you. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was quiet, healing in its simplicity. We weren't suddenly best friends again, but something fragile and real had begun to mend between us. When Ethan and I finally left, the night was nearly silent except for the chirping of crickets and the crunch of gravel under our feet. He opened the car door for me, and as we drove away, I looked back one last time. The venue shimmered behind us, distant and beautiful, like a chapter I was finally ready to close. Ethan glanced at me. You did more than crash a wedding today, he said with a small smile. You took back your story. I laughed softly, leaning my head against the window. Maybe, or maybe I just stopped letting them write it for me. He reached over and gently took my hand. Either way, I'm proud of you. A week later, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was small, trembling. Hey, she said. I've been thinking about what you said. You made me realize how unfair we've been. Not just to you, but to ourselves. You deserved to be there all along. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I smiled, tears prickling at my eyes. It's okay, I said quietly. I needed to come for me, not for you. I know, she whispered. And maybe that's what finally made me see you. When the call ended, I sat by the window, watching the sunlight paint gold patterns on the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter, the unwanted sister. I felt whole. I had walked into a room where I was never meant to belong, and I had left it with my dignity intact. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback or cruelty. It's about peace. It's about showing up when they think you won't, smiling when they expect you to break, and walking away stronger than ever. That day at my sister's wedding, I didn't reclaim their approval. I reclaimed myself. And as I closed my eyes, remembering the fireworks bursting above me, I realized that the brightest light had been mine all along.